some of those, what have been some of those most standout characteristics, whether good or bad, if you don't mind?
I have interviewed about 50 different candidates and had about maybe 70 total interviews so far. And I do feel like there are some aspects of people's applications that they could have represented themselves better. I think there are a lot of pros to electing for an in-person interview, and it requires the same discipline, consistency, and intensity as though you're taking a USMLE, because you want to make sure that you are ranked highly at every program you interview at.
Hello, hello. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. So let's get started, guys. Let's wait just one more minute for more people to come on in. Thank you, Amna. I appreciate it. Hey, Dr. Puthraj, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. Thank you so much. And let's get started in today's webinar. I think we have enough people here. Everybody's gathered around. Audio's good and groovy. All right. Well, thank you so much once again, everybody who's here in this webinar. Good morning, afternoon, evening to everybody. I am Dr. Erica of Team IMG Helping Hands, and welcome to today's webinar, which consists of tips for interview preparation, rank order list tips. This is going to be the webinar for creating the best match strategy. Today we have an amazing guest with us. We have Dr. Sonia Puthraj with us. Welcome and thank you so much once again, Dr. Puthraj.
Thank you so much. I know your organization is very reputable and well established and has helped so many international medical graduates match into positions. So I'm very honored to be invited to speak to you today.
Yes, no, thank you so much. And if you don't mind sharing a little more about yourself, Dr. Puthraj, I know you do a little bit of everything.
Right. So a little bit about my academic background. I went to Rice University in Houston. I graduated in 3 years, and then I received an early acceptance to Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School, USMD school, and I graduated with honors and went on to Rutgers in New Brunswick, where I graduated with honors and a teaching award. I have worked as a pediatric attending physician for 2 years in the United States, for 1 year as an urgent care physician and in primary care as well. I established my own primary care practice. So I currently own a direct primary care practice where I specialize in the assessment and diagnosis of autism spectrum disorders. And I was receiving training by the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. I'm also very passionate about medical education. I'm pursuing my master's at Harvard Medical School in medical education. And I also love creating content for free on Instagram. I'm Sonia Puthraj, MD on Instagram, and I give interview tips, and I'm creating a interview question and answer guide currently.
Wow. Oh my goodness. No, that is amazing, Dr. Puthraj. And I love your background. The fact that you are an educator, educating on interview. What was really the event, or was there anything in particular that fostered your interest with regards to medical education or education in general, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, I've been an educator for the past 15 years in different capacities. I come from a background, I'm Indian. My parents grew up poor and they came to this country and struggled in this country to survive. And, myself and my brother ended up becoming physicians based on their efforts. And my interest in education came from a desire to help populations in particular that are under-resourced or underserved. And so I started as a tutor in high school. I got 99 percentile SAT and ACT scores, so I tutored the SATs for 4 years. I actually was an admissions counselor for students interested in applying to top universities and medical schools in the United States for 4 years. So I have a lot of experience working with different interviewees, reading personal statements and applications for medical school in the US. And I was a teacher in residency. I was a strong senior resident. I graduated with a teaching award and numerous nominations for Resident of the Month. And then I decided to apply to Harvard to do my master's in medical education, where I'm working on a couple of different projects right now.
Wow. No, that's awesome. And I love that. As a former educator myself, I can definitely relate. And I really love your journey, Dr. Puthraj. I can definitely see how that interest in education has not only been there for a while now, but even transitioned over time, like you said, as you're going through your residency, your medical journey, as a professor, your mentorship has expanded from college prep to medical prep and now to residency prep, correct?
Yes, definitely. I mean, it all stems from like kind of growing up in a family that was sort of struggling and just knowing how hard it is for others. So I try to make the things that I'm doing either free or affordable so that people don't feel like there's gatekeeping. And I feel like there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily addressed to international medical graduates that are either mistakes they're making on their applications or during their interviews that are preventing them from securing match spots.
Oh, definitely, definitely. And with that you mentioned, um, any potential mistakes, I think it's very essential to, firstly be a mentor, uh, be a mentor to others, guiding them throughout. I love the initiative that you are doing, Dr. Pathraj, with regards to being a guidance at either low or no cost, fostering that community, encouraging that community of either minorities or IMG individuals. And, you know, as somebody who's been a faculty interviewer as well, kind of transitioning onto that, a big misconception, I think, when an individual gets interviews or interview invites is that I got the interview, I'm going to get ready for residency. Is that always the case? Is there sometimes maybe things they need to be preparing for, things they need to be preparing before their interview?
Yes, definitely. So this year, since joining Instagram, I have interviewed about 50 different candidates and had about maybe 70 total interviews so far. And I do feel like there are some aspects of people's applications that they could have represented themselves better or not included. And then I do feel like there are pretty common mistakes happening in the interviews that would be barriers to those individuals matching without support.
Really, really. And what were some of those, what have been some of those most standout characteristics, whether good or bad, if you don't mind me asking, Dr. Pathraj?
Right. So, like, fortunately, I have access to Harvard's databases, and I did a query as to how program directors feel about disclosure of adversity, medical conditions, and disabilities. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of people are disclosing a history of struggles, financial hardship, their own medical conditions, their parents having cancer, their parent suffering from alcoholism in the family or domestic violence in the family. And unfortunately, program directors tend to look unfavorably upon these types of disclosures, and individuals tend to progress less so in the application process when there are these types of disclosures made, particularly because they'll be worried if that individual is going to take time off or not going to succeed academically in the program. And so I think it's always best to highlight strengths in the personal statement, in the ERAS, and in the interview rather than focus on struggles.
Got it, got it. And if for some, that's actually a really good point you touched up on, Dr. Pathraj. And, that really makes me think about if for some instance an individual does go through hardships, they do come across challenges, whether it may be in their in their academic course or in their personal life. If it comes up in conversation during their interview, is there any way they can maybe either switch it to where it is looked upon as a strength, or do you just recommend not disclosing it? How do you recommend that navigation of challenges in a person's profile, we'd say?
That's a good question. I'll go through a couple different scenarios. One, let's say an individual has gone unmatched in previous cycles. I would say if that has not been disclosed by any of their letter writers, or they have not personally disclosed that on their personal statement, they might just want to avoid saying that they didn't match and say instead, this is the first year I feel like I can put my best foot forward. I have robust clinical experience in the United States at this point and a strong research foundation. I feel like I'd be a great asset. And this was the year that I felt was the best year. People also do need to address if their application heavily represents another specialty, they need to focus on the new specialty and why they're applying to that new specialty and why they're passionate and why they switched. A lot of people focus too heavily on their ENT application, let's say, when they didn't match, and now they're applying anesthesia or internal medicine. If you have failed an exam, if you have failed a course and had to remediate, then I would address it by saying, if it comes up that initially, I had a lot of family commitments, I thought about canceling my exam and it was a mistake that I didn't, but through dedication, consistency, and discipline, I was able to achieve a high score subsequently. And I don't believe that that will be a problem moving forward.
Okay, so definitely, again, just navigating through that balance of explanation, but not so much deviation or to the point to where it may appear unfavorable, correct?
Exactly. Like highlighting the strengths, you can mention I've experienced challenges like all of us, but they have crafted me into a strong and resilient and perseverant person rather than overemphasizing what those exact challenges were.
Got it, got it. And uh, just on a more general scope, is there anything that you've noticed programs look for in interviews beyond a student's metrics, like their scores, their grades, because that's often reflected in their step scores, in their transcripts. But once you have the person there face to face, is there anything that they are looking for that you would say?
Right. I feel like the candidates that I've interviewed that have stood out to me are candidates who smile, who minimize saying who communicate effectively, and who have unique answers. And I think one thing that I've noticed among all of the 50 or so individuals I've interviewed this cycle, international medical graduates, is that their first interview with me, all of them sounded very similar to each other. And I think that's a big mistake because if you stand out in an interview, even if you don't have the most stellar application, you can secure a spot in the program because they're looking for people who add to a good working environment. And they're looking for people who are friendly and approachable and will blend well without causing interpersonal issues in their program.
Got it, got it. Wow. And would would those qualities, I know you mentioned training, training individuals through the interviews that you do. Is there anything that you recommend students do in that regard? With I know you mentioned the nonverbals or the way in which they answer. Is there any tip or any just really I don't know, just something to come to mind for students to kind of reel back and come back into the interview question or answer, you would say?
Right. So I think practice is very important. I always recommend that students practice in front of a mirror and record themselves. So I had a student who even came to me and she smiled throughout the first half of the interview and then she stopped smiling. And I was curious about that. So I asked her and she said, I actually recorded myself in a mirror and I noticed that I wasn't smiling and it wouldn't have taken me. So I started smiling. But then, she had forgot to remind herself throughout, but I think practice for the interviews as though you're taking a step exam. Just take it as seriously as that because, it could be the reason that you lose a spot if you don't stand out in your interview.
Oh, definitely. And I know when you mentioned the smiling aspect, there's and this just reminds me of colleagues I've worked with, people I've come across, and I know this is a comment that has been extended to me before, where individuals are in a bit of a more polar, a more polarized place, so to say, where they are either more stoic, they are not the kind of individuals who are very uplift, not as smiling or, not as expressive, but they don't want to come off as disingenuous versus the students who, again, are all expression, and maybe asking them to smile might be too much for them. And again, causing them to come off as disingenuous. Is there anything that you recommend for these individuals, again, to where they can kind of come into a more common ground, not be in such a polarizing place, just really, again, not coming off as disingenuous, whether or not they stand where regardless in the spectrum?
Right, that's a really good question. So, on one end of the spectrum, I've worked with an older graduate who is a very stoic and stern person who doesn't smile very much. And we've really worked on that for her, even practicing smiling on a daily basis. I have had 10 sessions with her, and she's demonstrated significant improvement in smiling appropriately in a way that still remains to be professional. I think those people who are on the other end of the spectrum, who have much friendlier and bubblier personalities, need to be a little bit cautious of the extent to which they smile and or laugh or make jokes. I don't think jokes are necessarily the best approach for an interview because they may be taken the wrong way. So I hesitate to recommend joking. But I'm a very smiley and bubbly person, and I have learned to sort of tone it down during interviews so I can come across as professional and as strong as a candidate as possible. So there are options for both ends of the spectrum, but I do think smiling, especially when you're talking about questions not about challenges, failures, or mistakes, is a good idea because you come across a little bit more engaged.
Wow. And is there any particular exercise that you recommend to the students? Maybe, I don't know, uh, touching your face a certain way, or like you said, the mirror method, or any particular quirks that you recommend to them so that they can keep those nonverbals also in mind when undergoing their interviews?
So for virtual interviews, I recommend one, looking at the camera and putting a post-it note next to the camera. Because even in myself, I noticed at the beginning of this talk, I wasn't making direct eye contact. And I realized I wasn't looking at the camera like I told all my students to. And the other thing is you can put a note to smile. And I specifically told one of my students, if you keep saying as much as you're saying you might lose your spot. Because she said very frequently. It was very noticeable. And so she put a note on her computer that says no spot. So whatever you need to do to remind yourself to smile or to look at the camera, you can put little notes on your computer that aren't evident to your interviewer. But that's one tip.
And I know throughout the years, this is an amazing tip for individuals going through virtual interviews. And I know nowadays there are kind of hybrid options where individuals can either be in person, perhaps elect to go in person, or maybe a virtual option is not available to students. How do you recommend students navigating the equivalent of having a post-it note in an in-person interview? Or even better, are there any pros and cons to electing for an in-person interview versus virtual, Dr. Puthraj?
I think there are a lot of pros to electing for an in-person interview, and it requires the same discipline, consistency, and intensity as though you're taking a USMLE because you want to make sure that you are ranked highly at every program you interview at. And that means working hard to stand out and to prepare your answers properly. And there are a lot of doctors who offer mock interviews on Instagram too. But in person is a huge advantage. And I'll give you an anecdote. I had a mentee of mine this cycle who was one of two people who went in person to her residency's meet and greet. She lived in the area and she decided to go to the meet and greet, and there were two people. The program director gave them a tour of the entire hospital. He talked about his son, his mother, his family, and they all connected to each other. And people are much more likely to select a candidate that they have met and been interacting with for an extended period of time than someone who they've met virtually who is unknown to them. Because the reality is that a lot of times residents have a lot of issues, and that starts to come up during residency when you get to know them more. And if you can really connect with a program director or the residents, then they will vouch for you, and I think you are more likely to match at that program. So that's one example. The other thing, practice is very important. If you're not a person who smiles, you need to start smiling and practicing every day and dedicate hours of time to preparing for your interviews so that you're answering in a way that makes you stand out, sound unique, but not robotic or rehearsed.
Wow. And and on the flip side, for the individuals who do not have an option to go in person, let's say, as you mentioned, perhaps the open house is, I'm for example in Texas, on the other side of the country, maybe in Seattle. And as much as I would love to be there in person, unfortunately, either due to finances or distance, if a person cannot, is there any way that they can compensate in creating and fostering that connection with the admission committee?
Yes, definitely. Most of my mentees have gone to nothing in person, and I'm unfortunately I'm not doing mock interviews because I got overloaded with them, and so I'm just focusing on the candidates I've already been, speaking to, but they're getting very favorable feedback from their program directors and leadership because what they're doing is they're making themselves stand out in the application process, sound unique, they're well researched. They sound like they've researched the program well, and they're very specific. And one thing that I would just recommend is skimming your resume and thinking about what are program directors looking for. They don't want people to fail the boards. They want people with a history of academic excellence. They want people with research experience and transferable skills. So like qualitative, quantitative analysis, statistical methods, meta-analysis. And then they want people who want to step into leadership opportunities and contribute to their program and reflect well in their program. So, if you had any honors from medical school, if you received higher scores, if you have done research, if you've been published in good journals, that all needs to come up in the interview. And I even recommend saying it in the tell me about yourself section. Reciting your resume is a different thing, and I feel like a lot of people I was doing mock interviews with were just reciting a timeline of their experiences. Like, I was born in India, I went to medical school there, I was a medical officer for 2 years, I've done rotations in the US for 8 months. Then that's basically reciting your resume. But if you say, I have excelled at the highest levels academically and in research and leadership, and these are specific experiences from each of those categories that highlight that, then you're not reciting your resume, but you are drawing their attention once again in a real life setting to your strengths.
Got it. Wow. No, and that is such an excellent response, Dr. Puthraj, and an excellent point because the tell me about yourself question, I feel, is a very make or break moment, as a lot of the questions are throughout the interview. And I feel like that question really sets the stage on what direction the interview might be going into. And so I really like the way you elaborated on how students can talk about themselves in a way that it's not reiterating the resume, but rather just describing it. And I think that's a really neat way to look at it. That's definitely something that I'm going to be keeping in mind, something that should definitely be kept in mind for future interviews as well, because it's really easy to fall under that trap where tell me about yourself, give them a list of things. You know, what do you enjoy doing? And then just sounding immediately rehearsed. And so, what is one way that you recommend, or what is one tip that you recommend to students so that they again don't sound too rehearsed, or where again doesn't come off as disingenuous, come off as more authentic, as you mentioned, because that authenticity that you touched up on as well, I think is a very important point. What are some ways students can really make their authenticity shine?
So don't type out a paragraph or an essay and just memorize it. Do bullet points so that you can recall what you're going to touch on, but you are not sounding robotic and rehearsed because you're going to have to craft the sentences yourself in the interview. So you can practice from your bullet points, but each time you might say a different answer or sound different, but you're conveying the key points. And I just wanted to give an example of two different answers to tell me about yourself from a girl that I worked with. And she texted me after her interview. She said it went amazing. She was super confident. They loved her, and it was one of her top choice programs. So this girl came from, I'm going to change the country and the details so she's not identifiable, but she came from Nepal. And she told me, this was her tell me about yourself. She said, I'm from Nepal. I went to this medical school. So I graduated. I worked as a medical officer for 2 years. There was a natural disaster. I was a first line responder. I've come to the US. I'm researching here, and I've done 8 months of rotations. And so that's pretty much what every international medical graduate has told me. I did a careful review of her resume, and then I gave her this response, which I think was much better for her. So she actually was a first responder during a natural disaster, and she was applying to anesthesia. So I told her, okay, what relevant skills do you have that are going to make you sound more impressive? If you come in with procedural experience and you're applying to ER, or you're applying to IM, or you're applying to anesthesia, you have a leg up against all the other candidates. So tell me about yourself can really be also like a moment to highlight your strengths and tell them why they should pick you. So instead of her original response, this is what she said. She said, I'm originally from Nepal. I went to the most prestigious medical school in Nepal where I received a merit-based scholarship to attend, and I graduated with numerous honors. I was a medical officer, and there I learned a variety of cases, complex cases in internal medicine, and I did procedures such as IV lines, venipuncture, and arterial blood gases. There was an unexpected natural disaster, and I was proactive and volunteered to be a first line doctor. During that time, I performed over 100 resuscitations. I inserted femoral catheter lines. I performed difficult airways and intubations, and gained tremendous procedural experience that then I added on in the United States throughout all my rotations in trauma and ICU, where I received very positive feedback from my attendings and anesthesiologists I worked alongside. So you see how that sounds much better. Now she comes across as a candidate that you'd want to take her because, look, she was in a natural disaster, limited resource setting. She was intubating. She was doing femoral catheters. She was doing all procedures. So she left that interview feeling amazing because she had an amazing application. She's not interviewing correctly.
Got it. Wow. And those those two responses, there is such a great difference, Dr. Prithviraj. And I think that's such an amazing way in which the student just really flipped around their situation. I really do appreciate that you highlighted on that situation, because at the end of the day, both of the situations answered the question. They both answered the students said who they were. They mentioned their abilities, capabilities, and highlighted on their strengths. But again, what I'm noticing is, or the big takeaway in that scenario for the favorable outcome, was that she not only described, but she was able to tie it into the specialty in which she's pursuing then.
Right, exactly. I've noticed so many applicants who are applying from, let's say, ENT to internal medicine. And every single case they bring up, every single research paper is all geared towards ENT. If you are making a switch or transition from practicing in one specialty to another, you have to de-emphasize the original specialty and emphasize the specialty you're applying to and why you're switching. So it may not be the truth. It may be that you didn't match for a few years, but you have to, highlight why. So, for example, I was working with a physician. She's an older grad practicing ENT surgeon in India for 8 years. And now she moved to the US for marriage and is pursuing internal medicine. And so, you know, her whole personal statement and ERAS was all ENT activities. And I told her, listen, you have to come up with a compelling reason why you're applying to internal medicine. They don't want you to think that this is just a backup and you applied ENT, or you didn't match ENT and this is your backup. So she told me she worked during the COVID pandemic. So I said, you know, you could say you saw a broad variety of pathologies and complex cases across different subspecialties in internal medicine, and acutely assessed and stabilized critically ill children and critically ill adults as well. And in that process, you realized, although it wasn't the same specialty you originally were drawn to, you actually felt very connected to longitudinally caring for patients and the complexity and diversity of cases in a way that ENT could not offer. So there has to be a reason you switched, and you have to emphasize all internal medicine cases, all internal medicine research, all internal medicine, and de-emphasize ENT in your application. I had another candidate, same thing, all ENT publications, a Harvard degree, all ENT activities, and he was applying for internal medicine, only got 2 interviews. And I told him, you need to say his brother had head and neck cancer when he was younger. So I said, you can say that you did ENT initially because your brother had head and neck cancer, but over time you came to realize that research is not clinical, and your clinical interest came into internal medicine and oncology when you saw that following patients longitudinally was what you were actually interested in, and addressing healthcare disparities, community care, and quality improvement. And he texted me after that interview that he killed it, and that the program director told him, you addressed everything. I don't even feel like we have much to talk about. And then they just talked the rest of the time. So there's a way of navigating those certain circumstances that can still make you a good choice for a specialty, even if it's technically a specialty you don't even want to match to.
Got it. Wow. And I really appreciate the way you highlighted on that, Dr. Puthraj, that pivotal point, not just in connecting a student's events, life events, academic events to their desired specialty, but adding on to, if they are switching specialty, finding that pivotal point and that connection between the specialties that can segue a student from their interest in one and how that projected and propelled them to another. I think that is such an excellent thing to keep in mind, especially in interviews, as you mentioned, if a person either does not have a strong background to a certain specialty, or if they are transitioning between one specialty to another. And that really brings up a question to me during the interview itself, whether virtual or otherwise. Are there any particular questions that you see interviewers ask students that consistently distinguish strong candidates from average candidates, or perhaps even filter questions, so to say, to really see where the student is at?
Right. For this, I think residency program directors are asking sometimes random questions to just make sure you can think on your feet and critically think quickly and answer quickly. So, what I always recommend for questions that seem to make no sense, for example, what fruit are you? What vegetable are you? What Disney princess are you? Would you rather be Spider-Man, Batman? What car are you? They're looking for you to identify an answer, link it to a quality or attribute, and then link it to a case. So if you have a bank of 10 to 15 clinical cases that were fairly complex enough to where you would be able to speak about them at length, then you can then attribute a characteristic to an answer to one of those questions and link them all together. So I'll give you an example. Someone messaged me that they got an interview question that was, what car model were you? And so immediately I was like, okay, so I would be a Toyota because I am reliable, I'm consistent. I drive a Toyota and I've had it for the past 10 years and it has worked reliably. And this skill translates to clinical medicine. I'm reliable and consistent. When I was studying for my exams, I studied 8 months in advance. I woke up at 4 a.m. every day. I made 5,000 flashcards and 100 PowerPoints, and I increased my exam score from my practice exam to when I passed the full exam by 60 points and became a tutor for the exam. So I would be a Toyota. I'm reliable, I'm steadfast, I'm consistent, and I show up every day. So this type of answer makes you sound more impressive than someone who says, I'm a Lexus, because I don't know. You know, if you can think on your feet and then link that answer to an attribute and then talk about a case and then bring it back to the original question, that's going to make you seem like an impressive person because you can communicate well and you can think quickly and you can answer their random question in a way that's relevant to you being suitable for their program.
Wow, wow, wow. That's an excellent way to approach the question, Dr. Puthraj. And I think this is kind of where it touches up on, like you said, maybe sometimes, people could try to use humor to maybe remedy the unprecedented question they were just approached with. Or if a person is stumped, is there any recommendation you have for the individuals?
Right. So sometimes if you're not able to come up with something right away, you can always ask, that's a really great question. Can I get 1 minute to think about it? And sit and think. And I think that's better than starting to talk and then stuttering and stopping, which I've seen in interviews happen. So take a minute to think about it and then think through all your clinical cases that you've compiled. How can I answer this question? What fruit am I? So you have to be able to think, okay, there's pineapples, there's mangoes, there's sweet. I'm sweet. I was empathetic during this case. Okay, there you go. And then go for it because you should have the case in your mind, a list of 10 or 15 cases that you can easily speak about. So really the only work you need to be doing mentally to answer these difficult questions is answering the question like Spider-Man versus Batman and linking that to something about yourself that you can link to a case. So you could say, I'm Batman because I like to serve the underserved people and I don't like to do it for attention. And this is evidenced by my work in a federally qualified health center where I treated Spanish speaking patients, over 200 patients over the course of 6 months. And I like to serve the community, but I don't do it for the acknowledgement. I received no incentivization to do that type of work, but I always like to give back to the community. So like you just need to give yourself a minute to think sometimes, but if you have your cases and your qualities about yourself prepared, you should be able to answer those questions the more you practice.
Oh, no, I like that. I love that. And what I'm really finding out here is that those wacky questions or, those unexpected questions, the interviewer is not necessarily asking or fishing for the most outrageous answer, like you said, the flashiest Lexus, or what is the most unconventional fruit that I can think of in 3 seconds, right? But what I'm coming to find here, and this goes with the previous point that we were touching on, is the linkage then. So using these unconventional questions as a way to link to strengths, similar to, again, the previous instance, using either the unconventional background of a different specialty as a pivotal point to link to the specialty. So a common a common denominator I'm finding here is, regardless of the question, regardless of the scenario in which you're being posed to imagine, it's all ultimately about linking yourself to the specialty, linking yourself even to the program as well, correct?
Right, exactly. I feel like you have to think about the whole interview as trying to sell yourself. And the whole interview, if you had to summarize the whole interview from their perspective in one question, it's why should we select you over other candidates? Because they're interviewing maybe 100 other people that day. So how are you going to stand out? How are you going to add to their program? What value do you uniquely bring? What are your unique experiences? So that's where those things like if you have research skills, if you have procedural skills, if you have a history of academic excellence, if you've done innovative projects, if you've done quality improvement, that's what needs to be highlighted on your interview day, because you're competing against a number of other people who all are also international medical graduates, who all have also gone to schools abroad and done rotations in the US and had some research in the US. So how can you frame that in a way that distinguishes you from every single other person, and what is on your resume that you uniquely bring to the program?
Got it, got it. And as you mentioned, there are hundreds of individuals that a program is interviewing. I'm sure they've seen it all. Great board scores, XYZ publications and conferences, these, stellar grades. What are, in addition to that linkage practice that we are going to be applying in our future interviews, what are other ways, or what are some ways that students have stood out, either in an exceptionally positive or perhaps not so much way, from this perspective, Dr. Puthraj?
Right. One of the first students I interviewed was a USMD who got a full ride to medical school, who had over 20 honors and grants and awards for excellence. He had 25 publications in ENT, and he had 25 interviews, and he didn't match. And within 3 minutes of interviewing him, I knew why he didn't match, because of the way he interviewed. So, that's just a testament to how your interview can make or break you. That person has no red flags, excellent step scores, 25 interviews from a US school, and didn't match. So, I mean, why didn't he match? His his answers were long. He was rambling. He didn't seem prepared. He went on tangents. He is an American born person who just lacks good communication skills and lacks good interview skills. And I gave him that feedback. And after he called his mom and said that it was a great session and he's going to, do more to practice. But, unfortunately, sometimes it boils down to the interview, and some people can really lose their opportunities if they don't interview well. Now, on the other hand, there are people I've met who have scores in the 220s. They maybe didn't have any failures, but they have an unremarkable application, maybe like 2 research projects and no honors, but they're very charismatic when they interview, and they've done their research. So they really looked up the program. They found very unique things about the program. They looked up the residents. They can speak to how they would contribute to the program specifically, and why they want to go to that city specifically. And they come across as stronger than maybe a person with higher step scores who hasn't done as much research.
And again, ultimately, all coming down to research, practice, and find a link, then, correct?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Wow. Wow, yes, because as we're going throughout this webinar, Dr. Puthraj, I'm, keeping these points in mind, and I'm reiterating them as well, again, as a way to remember them, to come back to them. That way they can be applied in any future interviews, whether for residency, fellowship, or otherwise. And, I know we mentioned, we touched upon the linking, we touched upon the review and research of the program. Uh, Now, when it comes to the structure of the question, because once you mentioned that student who went on and perhaps spoke a bit too lengthy in one of their responses, is there a way you recommend structuring the responses? I know some people talk about the STAR method, some people talk about maybe timing yourself, some people, there's so many different strategies in that regard. Are there any that you think are excellent at, again, perhaps targeting that timeline, the time frame?
Yeah, I think first you just need to know the relevant experiences from your CV or from the program website that you're trying to highlight and put them in bullet points, and then practice talking. I've had people who I was very engaged listening to, talking for over 2 minutes. And I've had people who I was bored within 30 seconds. So I don't think you necessarily have to limit your answers to 1 minute, but your answer has to be engaging and convincing. So every point you make really should be a point of supporting evidence as to your claim as to why you would be selected over others. So I used to recommend doing a timer for 1 minute, but ever since experiencing some interviews where they're very engaging candidates talking for 2 minutes and they just have so many experiences that are relevant, I feel like it's not so much exactly the time, it can be 1 to 2 minutes, but it's the content that's being brought up.
Got it, got it. So it's all dependent on the question then, and just really focusing on the bullet points, the main points.
That's what I think though.
Okay, perfect, perfect. And let's say a student goes through, again, they landed the interview, they went throughout their interview, they applied the tips from this webinar where they link themselves, scenarios to the specialty or the program themselves, they time themselves, the interview is over. Are there any things that any particular things that you recommend students to do as a post-interview strategy, Dr. Puthraj? Is there anything that makes what makes a professional and effective post-interview follow-up for a prospective applicant?
Right. I always recommend sending a thank you email to every person who interviewed you 24 hours after. I wouldn't send it within 24 hours, like not the same night, definitely not, but maybe the following morning or afternoon subsequent to the interview. And with a format similar to Dear Dr. Patel, thank you very much for your time and consideration. I loved our conversation yesterday about, and then go into some specifics about the conversation. I'm very interested, as I expressed, in your programs, let's say medical education curriculum, research opportunities in gastroenterology and tube-based nutrition feeds, and so whatever specifics you discussed. And I'd really like to thank you for this wonderful opportunity. Um, and looking forward to hearing from you best and end it. And I had someone whose program director replied, I can't tell you where you're ranked, but I actually felt like that program director was very interested in the student and just couldn't tell them that they were going to select them. But that's the impression I had from their interactions with that program director. But I would definitely send a thank you email to all the faculty that interviewed you shortly after 24 hours after your interview.
Wow. Wow, perfect. And is there a specific individual you recommend them reaching out to? I know some people say reach out to the program director, some people say reach out to the program coordinator, some people say both. Everybody. Is there anybody you recommend, Dr. Pathraj?
Yeah, I think just sending an email to everyone who made your day possible, just to show that you are a person who is kind and treats all people with respect, and not only the program director, but also if the program coordinator or an administrator helped facilitate your day. I don't think it is harmful for you to thank them and appreciate them for, facilitating your day. And I think that honestly makes you look like a person with good character who is acknowledging how everyone contributed to their interview day and experience.
Got it. Perfect. And now, post interview, they said their thanks. It's time to create the rank order list. Are there any misconceptions that applicants have about building their rank order list? Or, are there any tips that you have for individuals who are maybe in between two places that they interviewed at? What are some of the tips that you have for approaching now the post-interview rank order situation for a prospective resident?
Well, I would first consider where you'll have the best support system, if you will have extra support. So if you have family close by to any of the programs, I would consider ranking that program more high. Now, I've always heard that the rank is in favor of the applicants, meaning that you should not try to like game the system into which program you think you interviewed best at and rank accordingly, but rather just rank according to your wishes. And I think residency is a very difficult time. And if you have friends or family who are in close proximity to one of the programs, I think that should be a large contributing factor because it's difficult. And sometimes, I mean, sometimes you can rely on the residents as your friends, but sometimes you can't. And having a good support system is a major thing. But the other aspect is, do you want to do fellowship? Where do you see your career? Because like, let's say you have an opportunity in an academic institution. If you're a research oriented person and you want to do fellowship, then you may want to go to an academic institution that has more resources for research and teaching and leadership opportunities.
And that's a really interesting response, Dr. Puthraj, and I really appreciate that you brought up that point on academic versus, community programs. Let's say, for example, a student is very academically based, and perhaps for some reason, they seem to maybe have resonated more with the community program, or it seems the community program might have been more favorable towards them. Even though you mentioned the rank order list is more favorable upon residents, would you recommend, if they were in the crossroads, to go for the academic institution, which may or may not have ranked them as favorably to their perception as the community program based on their future projections? Is that a common
That's a really
occurrence?
that's a tough question. The question is then, which program do you really want to go to and see yourself at, you know? Because if you see yourself at the community program and the program director gave you a lot of those subtle nonverbal signs that they're going to accept you and you would be happy there, then I would rank that higher. But if you're kind of, you weren't sure about the interview, but at both of them you're not sure, and you don't have family either place, I would probably rank the academic institution higher, depending. But I mean, it depends also on the academic picture, like what your step scores are. And there's a way to search programs based on how IMG friendly they are, based on how they typically accept people based on scores. So I know that where I trained, if they took IMGs, they would have to have like a certain score threshold. I went to Rutgers, New Brunswick, so some people aren't as inclined to rank it as high if they feel like their application isn't as robust.
Got it, got it. No, and I appreciate that clarification, Dr. Puthraj. Those are very interesting, or excuse me, important things to keep in mind, both considerations for oneself in students going through their academic journey, but also maintaining that realistic and those considerations on the behalf of the residency programs as well. And I know you mentioned the subtle cues that a student might be favorably ranked by a certain program. I that really brought up the question to me. Is there any way that a student can or can identify what are those nonverbal cues? What are those subtle cues? Is that necessarily an indication that they will be matching into that respective residency program? What could those cues be, if you don't mind me asking, Dr. Puthraj?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so I was counseling my friend from university who's older grad applying to a USMD school. And here are a couple of the things that signaled him to the fact that he would be accepted. So first, when he went to the interview, they said that they had heard about him or had been talking about him. And I don't think that's uncommon, actually. I feel like sometimes international medical graduates will also experience that. So that's always a positive sign. And if in the interview they talk, it's engaging, but they talk much more about themselves, they barely ask any questions. I had a mentee who is an international medical graduate who, went to the program's meet day, and she had a long conversation with the program director, and he, told her that we don't just accept people from the meet days, but the residents all said they got accepted from those days. And then her interview, he didn't ask her any questions. He just like talked about himself. So I feel if they don't really ask you many questions and they talk about themselves and their research, and my friend who got accepted to a USMD medical school early, at the end they said, well, we'll look forward to seeing you in class, and I don't know that residency program directors can necessarily do that, but if I feel like you can generally get a good sense from your interviews how they went, especially if you're an emotionally intelligent person. Everyone I've worked with in a mock interview has texted me that it went incredible and they felt like the program director loved them. So they all had that sense, and they were very nervous going into their interview, not egotistical or overconfident at all. So I trust the sense that they got.
Got it. Got it. Wow. Those are excellent points. And those are really excellent points to really keep in mind, Dr. Puthraj. And on the flip side, conversely, if you don't mind me asking, are there any signs that maybe an applicant, not that their interview is unfavorable, but maybe that an applicant might have to rank them a certain way? Or are there any signs that an applicant might be over or undervaluing a program if perhaps those nonverbals are a bit more obscure, if you don't mind me asking? How do you recommend them navigating that?
Well, one, it depends on how emotionally intelligent the applicant is, because, some people can't discern their own emotions or others' emotions very easily. But if they're an emotionally intelligent person and didn't get a strong feeling about the interview, it might be just a feeling that, like, maybe that program is not a program they left a good impression on. I'm working with a different mentee who I just met, and he said to me that he applied last cycle for internal medicine and he didn't match, but after when he didn't match, he kind of like knew, because like he said, like, I don't think I did well in the interviews, and I interviewed him and I was like, yeah, you have a lot to work on, so he knew that he was like predicting that he wouldn't.
Mm, got it. Okay, okay, that makes sense. And translating that into the students' rank order list, is there a piece of advice that you wish every applicant understood before submitting their rank order list, Dr. Puthraj?
Well, there's two main things I feel like you have to consider, and it's what program do you really want to go to and what program really wants you. And those programs belong at the top of your list. So if you know, I just spoke to a mentee who had a very favorable interview at a family medicine program where she feels like it went so well that she probably got the spot. But she was practicing interviewing for an academic institution and she was really interested in research and things like that. So I haven't heard how that went, but those two programs like belong at the top of her list just based on her own
Mhm.
interests, but also her own likelihood of matching at the program that's basically subtly cueing to her that they will match. One point I wanted to address also is if you haven't signaled a program and they know that, they might not ask you that, but you might want to say, you know, um, I originally signaled programs, but I didn't have much mentorship or guidance. But as I've progressed through the interview trail and learned more about each of the programs, I do want to express that I'm very impressed by your program and I feel like I would be very well trained here. And I have, I feel like there are a lot of positive aspects to your program that I wasn't previously aware of, or so just to mention, if you didn't signal a program and now you're realizing that all the ones you gold signaled didn't interview you, so that you can kind of mention it in a way to reframe it.
Mhm, mhm, mhm. Got it, got it. And just to confirm, can a student mention in their interviews that they signaled a certain program or perhaps the program I am interviewing with? Can I let them know, like you said, subtly or otherwise, that they've been signaled? Might that help the standing of an applicant?
Well, I wouldn't say like I sent you one of my gold signals in the interview so openly, but you can say like this institution is a top choice institution and I believe I would be best trained here. I have close family members in this area. I love your medical education curriculum, your didactics, and your research opportunities, and I would love to represent your program at case conferences and poster presentations. But I mean, you can say it in that way. Like, this is a very prestigious institution. This is my top choice for this many reasons. So you don't. It's not like unfair or not appropriate to say it's your top choice.
Got it, got it. Okay, okay. I like the way that was posed. I appreciate that, Dr. Pathraj. And we're almost at time. We've really covered so many things. I really appreciate all the points that we went through, Dr. Pathraj, from from the do's and don'ts of interviews, how to navigate certain interview questions, either clinical or otherwise, the post-interview process, and even the rank order list. Are there any core principles or any last messages that you would like 2026 match applicants to know and to remember for their application cycle? If there's any, again, if there are any last messages that you would like to leave the students, what would those be, Dr. Patrash?
I would say take your interview very seriously. Treat it like it's an exam. Put hours of work into it every day. Sacrifice whatever else you have going on because it can make or break you. And I've met over 50 people and I thought all of their interviews were pretty lackluster. I told people, I don't think you're going to match off that interview. And a lot of them have been able to flip it around and go to interviews and kill it and feel like I had an example of an OB resident who didn't mention POCUS, didn't mention his anatomy position, didn't mention his community advocacy in his mock interview. And I told him, you have to mention all of that. And then I told him, don't mention that there's a history of alcoholism in your family or there's domestic violence. And he owned a company and he was going to continue to run that company as a resident. And I told him, you should not say that. You should say you're passing the company on to your brother. So all of those points came up in his interview, and the program director was like, oh, we knew about the POCUS. That's why we interviewed you. What about your business? Are you going to run that business? And he said, no, I'm giving it to my brother. She said, good choice. And then he talked about anatomy. And then they asked him like, oh, so your dad's an alcoholic? And what about that? And they asked him about it and he was prepared. So it can make or break you. That was his top choice program and he felt great about it. So I think as best as you can, you should try to do a mock interview just to get some feedback. Practice in the mirror like your life depends on it, because it does, to match. If you ace your interview, you get a spot in the United States and you're all brilliant and talented and deserve to be doctors here. You didn't work
Wow.
hard, you didn't work this hard in your life and sacrifice so much and achieve everything you did to just lose it all on the basis of one 30-minute conversation.
Right, right. No, definitely, Dr. Pathrash. And I really do appreciate your words. The big takeaways that I'm getting from this webinar then is to just really hone in on those connections. If there is a weakness that we are going to transition as a strength, we need to find that connection. If there is a certain specialty that you're interested in or a certain residency program that you're interested in, whether your background is strong or otherwise, find connections, find pivotal points to really connect yourself to the residency, to the program. Really practice, as you mentioned, in not just rehearsing a pre-written paragraph, but really enhancing on those bullet points that will really elaborate and make your strengths shine. And just lastly, practice, practice, practice. I think those are excellent points that you touched up on, Dr. Pathraj. And I have here an excellent question by Humna, and I was actually going to ask something very similar in a very similar nature. She's mentioning here, they're mentioning here that they are currently a med student. They're working to strengthen their application but in the instance that they are not a fluent English speaker, is there any way that they can, enhance on that? Do they need to be completely fluent? Is there anything applicants need to be doing today, especially if they're feeling behind, Dr. Puthraj?
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry. I didn't realize we had time. No, I'm sorry, but I'll respond in
No,
the rest
you're
of the
good.
time.
You're good.
I'm so sorry. So I okay, I have met everyone I've met is an international medical graduate. No one has English as their first language, and some people are experiencing thought blocking. Like they literally can't think of the word. And so if that is the case, then you need to like get an interview guide and go off of that, you know? Like I have met people who like how I do mock interviews is I give them verbal feedback, and I've met people who are able to structure their sentences with the help of an English speaking person. So, it's not feasible for you to just like completely improve your English. No one I have talked to has the English speaking capabilities of someone who is born in the United States, and that's fine. You don't have to. I can understand all of them, and they just need to practice and then try to practice with someone who speaks English.
Got it, got it. Perfect. No, thank you so much, Dr. Pratash, and thank you so much once again. That was actually a very excellent closing question, and thank you so much for bringing that up as well, Hamna. I did provide some excellent links, some very helpful links, both linking to our community. If individuals have any questions regarding their upcoming interviews here at IMG Helping Hands, as the name goes, we do our best to help and support you in any way that we can. Anything either research related, interview prep related, definitely join the community, get in touch. We'd be more than happy to help and assist you. Likewise, I have also shared Dr. Prithraj's Instagram page. This here is going to go further in depth. What you saw here in today's webinar times a million, because Dr. Prithraj really does emphasize on the do's and don'ts, on certain scenarios of how to navigate the interview process. And so I do appreciate your time once again, Dr. Prithraj. Thank you for your guidance. Just really thank you for all of those tips, because I feel sometimes students might not get these tips from anywhere else, or they might not get them from people who are interviewing, from medical school professors, people who are in the interview panels, people who have been on both sides. So I think this was such an excellent webinar, Dr. Puthraj, and I do thank you once again for your time and for all of the invaluable information you shared with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really impressed. This organization is so wonderful, and I was so grateful when the CEO reached out or I reached out to speak, and he invited me and has been helping me with even coordinating rotation. So he's like, this whole organization is so impressive, and it's been a really honor to be able to speak at one of your webinars. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Puthraj. And thank you once again for your time. Thank you so much for everybody who was here in today's webinar. That'll be concluding today's webinar again on interviewing tips, ROI tips. Thank you so much to everybody once again. Dr. Puthraj will definitely continue keeping in touch. And thank you for all of your guidance once again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And everybody, thank you for joining today's webinar for the questions. I wish everybody who is having an interview season coming up, like I said, reach out to Dr. Puthraj through her Instagram page, join the research community, join the WhatsApp community. As Dr. Puthraj mentioned, stay prepared, stay on top of it, stay ready. We'll stay connected, guys, and we'll see you on our next webinar. Thank you so much and have a good one. Bye.